The night sky was a blanket of stars, shimmering against the deep abyss of space. For Ethan Carter, a junior scientist at NASA, the stars held endless possibilities and mysteries, but tonight something felt different. An unsettling tension hung in the air as he stared out the window of the observatory, his heart racing with anticipation. The project he had been working on for months was about to reveal something extraordinary, something that would change everything. Ethan had been part of a top-secret team working on a project codenamed Operation Horizon. The details were shrouded in secrecy, but he knew it involved analyzing data from a recently discovered exoplanet designated T-21. Initial scans had suggested the presence of life, something that had ignited a fire of curiosity in Ethan. However, the deeper they dug, the more concerning their findings became. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Dr. Vivian Hart, the lead scientist on the project. "Ethan, we need to meet. There's something you need to see." Unease crept into his mind as he made his way to the lab. The sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway felt longer than usual, shadows dancing across the walls. He had heard whispers among the staff, strange noises in the data, unexplained phenomena in the signals. They were all dismissed as glitches or interference, but Ethan felt something darker was at play. As he entered the lab, he found Dr. Hart staring intently at a computer screen. The room was dimly lit, illuminated only by the glow of the monitors. Data streamed across the screens, lines of code and graphs depicting the planet T-21. It was as if the very essence of the universe was being laid bare before them, revealing secrets humanity was never meant to know. "Ethan," Dr. Hart said without looking up, a voice strained. "Thank you for coming. We've discovered something unexpected." "What do you mean?" he asked, a knot tightening in his stomach. She turned to him, her face pale. The initial scans showed signs of organic material, but the deeper analysis, it's showing something else, something that shouldn't exist. "What do you mean?" Ethan pressed, trying to grasp the enormity of her words. Dr. Hart finally turned the monitor toward him. The image flickered to life, revealing a grotesque organic structure, pulsating with a sickly glow. "This is what we found in the data. It's a biological entity, but it's not just any life form. It appears to be sentient." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "Sentient? How can that be? We thought T-21 was barren." "I know," she replied, her voice trembling, "but it's more than that. The patterns, the signals, they're trying to communicate. We've intercepted a series of messages that don't follow any known language structure." His heart raced as he absorbed the implications. "If this is true, we need to tell someone. We have to alert the higher-ups." Dr. Hart's expression darkened. "You don't understand, Ethan. I've already tried. They don't want to hear it. The higher-ups they're concerned about what we might unleash. They believe it's better to keep this under wraps." "What do you mean?" he asked, bewildered. "What are we dealing with here?" A chilling silence enveloped the room. "We're not just talking about extraterrestrial life, Ethan. We're talking about a consciousness that might be aware of us. It's evolving, adapting, and it's angry." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. "Angry? Why would it be angry?" Dr. Hart looked away, her gaze heavy with dread. "Because we've been probing into its existence, we've invaded its space, and it's retaliating. There have been incidents." "What kind of incidents?" he demanded, his voice barely a whisper. "Communications blackouts, equipment failures, and last night the drone we sent to gather more data, it went dark. When it came back, there was nothing left but pieces." Ethan's stomach churned. "Pieces? What do you mean?" Dr. Hart swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes. There were signs of struggle. The drone had been dismantled. It's like it was trying to escape. A heavy silence fell over them, the weight of their discoveries sinking in. Ethan felt a cold sweat form on his brow. What do we do now? We need to find out more, but we must be careful, Dr. Hart warned. I fear that if we dig deeper, we might awaken something that should remain asleep. As they spoke, a low rumble echoed through the lab. The lights flickered ominously, and the computer screens momentarily went dark. Panic surged through Ethan as he exchanged a worried glance with Dr. Hart. What was that? He asked, his heart racing. I don't know, she replied, her voice tense. It shouldn't be happening. Just then, the emergency alarms blared, filling the room with a deafening sound. Red lights flashed, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Ethan, we need to get to the control room, Dr. Hart said urgently, her eyes wide with fear. They sprinted through the dimly lit hallways, the alarms echoing in their ears. As they reached the control room, Ethan's stomach dropped at the sight before him. The monitors displayed chaos, signals scrambling, equipment malfunctioning, and reports of unknown entities being detected in the facility. Get a hold of security, Dr. Hart shouted, her voice strained. We need to lock down the building. Ethan's hands trembled as he fumbled with the controls. I'm trying, but the systems are failing. It's like something is overriding our commands. Suddenly, one of the monitors flickered to life, displaying a grainy feed from a surveillance camera. Ethan's heart raced as he focused on the screen. In the dim light, a shadowy figure loomed at the end of the corridor, pulsating with an unnatural energy. What is that? Ethan gasped, his breath hitching in his throat. Dr. Hart's face turned ashen. It can't be. No, this isn't happening. The figure began to move toward them, gliding through the corridor with an eerie grace. It emitted a low hum, resonating through the very walls of the building. The alarms continued to blare, a chaotic symphony of terror. We need to get out of here, Ethan yelled, fear driving him to action. But before they could move, the lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The alarms fell silent, leaving an oppressive silence that made Ethan's skin crawl. In the pitch black, they could hear a faint whisper, a voice echoing through the void. Who are you? It hissed, a cold chill creeping up Ethan's spine. We need to go, now! Dr. Hart urged, her voice trembling as she felt her way to the door. But as they reached for the exit, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic surged through Ethan as he pounded on the door, desperate to escape. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, reverberating in the confined space. It seemed to surround them, invading their thoughts, clawing at the edges of their sanity. You should not have come. As the voice echoed in their minds, a feeling of dread washed over Ethan. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. Whatever they had awakened was far more powerful than they could comprehend, and it was hungry. The door rattled violently, but no matter how hard Ethan and Dr. Hart pushed against it, it remained firmly shut. The whispering voice filled the air, a chilling amalgamation of sound that seemed to invade their minds. Ethan felt as though it was reaching into his very soul, trying to extract his deepest fears. Ethan, Dr. Hart's voice broke through his terror. We need to find another way out. Look for a window or an emergency exit. With his heart pounding in his chest, Ethan scanned the room. The dim emergency lights flickered ominously, casting long shadows across the floor. His gaze darted to the far wall, where a small window offered a glimpse of the outside world. It was high up, but there had to be something they could use. Over there, he shouted, pointing to the window. We can break it if we have to. Dr. Hart nodded, and together they sprinted towards the window. Ethan's mind raced as he thought of how to break the thick glass. Just as they reached it, the whispering intensified, morphing into a cacophony of anguished cries. You will not escape. You are ours. Ethan's hands trembled as he grabbed a metal chair from a nearby desk. With all his strength, he swung it against the window. The sound of shattering glass pierced the air, and shards rained down around them. "Go, climb through," he urged, already clambering up to the sill. Dr. Hart followed suit, her eyes wide with panic. As they clambered through the opening, Ethan felt a strange sensation wash over him. Something cold and clammy, like fingers brushing against his back. He pushed himself through the window, landing hard on the grass outside. The night air was filled with an eerie silence, the chaos inside the building muffled as they regained their bearings. Dr. Hart emerged beside him, her face pale and streaked with fear. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Anywhere but here," Ethan replied, looking around the darkened campus. The observatory loomed behind them like a monstrous shadow, its lights flickering ominously. "Wait!" Dr. Hart exclaimed, her eyes wide. "The research vehicles. We can get to them and drive away." Without waiting for a response, she took off toward the parking area. Ethan followed closely behind, adrenaline pumping through his veins. As they reached the lot, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. The vehicles were all parked neatly, but something felt off. The air was thick with tension, and an unsettling stillness enveloped them. "Get in!" Dr. Hart shouted, rushing to one of the SUVs. They scrambled inside, locking the doors with shaky hands. Ethan quickly fumbled with the ignition, his heart racing. The engine roared to life, but as he put it in gear, the radio crackled ominously. "You cannot run!" He flinched, glancing at Dr. Hart, whose face was frozen in terror. "We have to get out of here," he urged. "Just drive," she cried, her eyes darting nervously. Ethan slammed the accelerator, and the vehicle shot forward. They sped away from the observatory, the darkness swallowing them whole. But even as they drove, the sense of dread didn't dissipate. In fact, it grew stronger, crawling under his skin, like an insidious parasite. "Where are we going?" Dr. Hart asked, trying to catch her breath. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We need to find a safe place to regroup, to figure out what's going on." As they tore down the winding road leading away from the campus, Ethan noticed strange lights flickering in the sky above them. He squinted, trying to discern what they were. It looked like flashes, pulsating in a rhythm he couldn't quite understand. "Ethan, look!" Dr. Hart pointed toward the sky. "What is that?" The lights twisted and turned, forming shapes that danced in the atmosphere. Ethan felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. "I don't know, but it can't be good." Suddenly, the radio blared to life again, drowning out their thoughts. "We are coming for you." Ethan felt his blood run cold. "This isn't happening," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "We need to find a way to communicate with the main office. Warn them," Dr. Hart insisted, a voice rising in panic. "Yeah, if we can get to a phone, maybe we can reach someone." Before he could finish, the ground beneath them trembled violently, and the SUV lurched as if caught in an earthquake. Ethan struggled to keep the vehicle on the road. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted. "Just keep driving," Dr. Hart screamed, clutching the dashboard as they skidded to a stop. In the distance, a massive shadow loomed against the backdrop of the sky. It was a structure, an enormous building that hadn't been there before. Ethan's heart raced as he recognized it. It was an abandoned research facility, one that had been shut down years ago due to mysterious circumstances. "We can take shelter there," Dr. Hart shouted, her voice barely heard over the rumbling. Without hesitation, Ethan slammed the car into reverse and spun the wheel, accelerating toward the dark silhouette. They pulled up to the entrance, the imposing structure towering over them like a sentinel of doom. "Let's go," he urged, glancing around nervously. The sky was alive with flickering lights, and the whispers from before had returned, echoing in his mind. They stepped out of the vehicle, the air heavy with an unsettling energy. The door creaked ominously as they entered the facility. Inside it was dark, with only a few flickering lights illuminating the grimy walls. "This place is a wreck," Dr. Hart murmured, looking around. What were they researching here? "Whatever it was, it couldn't have been good," Ethan replied, his voice tense. "We should keep moving." As they wandered deeper into the facility, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a sinister breeze. Ethan shivered, feeling as though something was watching them. "Did you hear that?" Dr. Hart asked, her eyes darting to the shadows. "Yeah," Ethan whispered, straining to listen. "It's like a chorus." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the building, causing them both to jump. "What was that?" Dr. Hart gasped, gripping Ethan's arm. "I don't know," he replied, his heart pounding, "but we should check it out." They crept cautiously towards the source of the noise, the air thick with fear. Each step felt like a descent into madness. The whispers intensified, almost as if urging them to turn back, to flee. But curiosity drove them forward. As they turned a corner, they found a large, dimly lit room filled with old equipment and dusty files scattered across tables. In the center stood a massive machine, its screens flickering with indecipherable data. "What is this place?" Dr. Hart whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Ethan moved closer, peering at the screens. The data appeared to be a collection of signals, uninterpreted language patterns from T-21. He felt a chill run down his spine. "Ethan, look!" Dr. Hart pointed to a nearby table, where a series of photographs lay scattered. He picked one up, his breath catching in his throat. It was a picture of the entity from T-21. The creature was grotesque, with twisted limbs and a gaping maw filled with sharp teeth. The caption read, "Do not engage. It is aware." A wave of nausea swept over him. What the hell did they discover here? Before Dr. Hart could answer, the lights flickered violently, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged as the whispers transformed into anguished screams, reverberating through the room. "You should not have come. You are not welcome." Ethan and Dr. Hart stumbled back, fear coursing through their veins. In the darkness, the air grew colder, the temperature dropping sharply. They could see their breath, white puffs swirling in the frigid air. "What do we do?" Dr. Hart cried, her voice tinged with terror. "Find a way out," Ethan shouted, his heart racing. "We can't stay here." As they turned to leave, a deafening roar echoed through the facility, shaking the very walls. The lights surged back to life, illuminating the room once more. But they were not alone. In the shadows, a figure emerged, its form twisting and writhing. The creature from the photograph stood before them, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It opened its maw, revealing rows of jagged teeth, a sinister grin spreading across its face. "You have trespassed into my domain. Now you will pay the price." Ethan felt his blood run cold as he stumbled backward, trying to pull Dr. Hart away from the monstrosity. "Run!" he yelled, adrenaline pushing them into action. They dashed towards the exit, but the creature lunged at them, its movements unnaturally fast. Ethan barely dodged as it crashed into the wall, sending debris flying. "Ethan, it's coming!" Dr. Hart screamed, her voice filled with desperation. They burst through the door and sprinted down the hallway, the creature's guttural growls echoing behind them. It was gaining on them, the ground shaking with each of its massive strides. "Left! This way!" Ethan shouted, veering down a side corridor. He had no idea where it led, but any path away from the creature felt like a chance at survival. They raced through the twisting hallways, desperate for an escape. Ethan's mind raced, trying to remember the layout of the facility. He could hear the creature's breath behind them, a hot, fetid gust that sent chills down his spine. Finally, they reached a set of double doors, marked with an ominous, authorized personnel only sign. Ethan pushed through, and they stumbled into a large chamber filled with old equipment. It looked like a makeshift control room, but it was too dark to see clearly. "Ethan!" Dr. Hart gasped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What do we do?" He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a console illuminated by flickering lights. "If we can get this running, maybe we can call for help." He rushed to the console, fingers flying over the buttons. The screen blinked to life, displaying a chaotic array of data. He could see transmission lines that connected to the main NASA facility, but the static on the screen indicated something was wrong. Something was interfering. "Help! We need help!" he shouted into the microphone, desperation lacing his voice. "This is not how it ends." The creature's voice echoed through the room, reverberating in Ethan's skull. He looked up, heart racing as the creature materialized in the doorway, blocking their escape. Its body twisted and warped, a mass of dark tendrils extending from its form. "No, get back!" Dr. Hart cried, pushing Ethan behind her. "We need to find another way." But there was nowhere to go. The creature loomed closer, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness, a predator closing in on its prey. Ethan's mind raced, the horror of their situation sinking in. "We can't let it get us. We have to fight." He turned back to the console, desperately searching for anything that could help them. A series of buttons caught his eye, and without thinking, he pressed one. The room erupted in blinding light as alarms blared around them. Red lights flashed, and a series of mechanical sounds filled the air. The creature shrieked, recoiling from the light as if burned. "What have you done?" it howled, its voice a mix of rage and anguish. "Get ready!" Ethan shouted, adrenaline surging through him. "We can use this against it." The console sparked with energy, and Ethan saw a series of weapon systems activate on the screen. "If I can redirect the power, maybe we can trap it." Dr. Hart's eyes widened as she understood his plan. "Do it, just don't let it get close." The creature writhed in pain, and Ethan quickly began inputting commands into the console. As he worked, the lights flickered, and the air crackled with electricity. He could feel the creature's anger intensifying, a palpable force pressing down on them. "You cannot contain me!" it screeched, lunging forward. Ethan hit a final button, and a bright beam of energy shot out from the console, slamming into the creature. It howled in fury, thrashing against the force holding it back. For a moment, it seemed like the attack was working, but then it began to pull free, its dark tendrils reaching toward them. "Ethan, it's breaking through," Dr. Hart cried, panic flooding her voice. "Hold on," he shouted, gritting his teeth as he poured every ounce of focus into maintaining the energy beam. But the creature was relentless, its power overwhelming. Suddenly, the console began to short-circuit, sparks flying as the systems overloaded. "No, not now!" Ethan yelled in frustration, sweat beading on his forehead. "Ethan, we have to run!" Dr. Hart urged, her eyes wide with fear. "No!" he shouted, determination flooding his voice. "We can't give up. We have to finish this." But before he could act, the creature surged forward, breaking free from the beam. Ethan felt the air rush around him as it lunged, its claws outstretched. He barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as it crashed into the console, sending sparks flying. "Ethan!" Dr. Hart screamed, her voice filled with terror. Ethan scrambled to his feet, adrenaline coursing through him. He glanced at Dr. Hart, fear etched on her face, and he knew they had to end this. "Get to the emergency exit," he shouted, pointing toward a door at the far end of the chamber. "I'll hold it off." "No, I can't leave you," she protested, her eyes welling with tears. "Just go," he insisted, his voice firm. "I'll find you. Just get out." With a final look, Dr. Hart turned and ran towards the exit, her footsteps echoing in the chaos. Ethan faced the creature, his heart racing as it glared at him, its glowing eyes filled with rage. "You will pay for this," it growled, advancing toward him. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself. "You're not going to take us," he said defiantly, his hands trembling but ready. "We're not afraid of you." The creature lunged again, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan ducked just in time, rolling away from the impact. He scrambled to the console, desperately trying to regain control of the energy systems. With a quick glance back, he saw the creature recovering, its form shifting and writhing as it prepared for another attack. Time was running out and he knew he had to act fast. "Come on," he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. He could feel the energy building, surging through the console. Just as the creature lunged again, Ethan redirected the energy, unleashing a wave of blinding light. The room erupted in a flash, illuminating the creature in its grotesque form. "No!" it shrieked, a sound filled with fury and despair. Ethan poured everything into the blast, channeling the energy with all his might. The creature writhed and screamed, but he could see its form beginning to distort, as if the energy was tearing it apart. In that moment, a surge of hope ignited within him. "This is for Tihi-21, he shouted, his voice echoing through the chaos. With one final push, he unleashed the energy and the creature erupted in a brilliant flash of light. It howled in agony as it was consumed by the blast, its form disintegrating into the very air around them. Ethan fell to the ground exhausted, the remnants of the energy crackling around him. As the light faded, he looked up to see that the creature was gone, leaving only silence in its wake. He had done it, but the victory felt hollow. The weight of what they had uncovered hung heavily in the air, and the remnants of the whispers lingered, echoing in his mind. "You have not seen the last of us." Struggling to his feet, Ethan took a deep breath, shaking off the fatigue. He turned to the emergency exit, hoping Dr. Hart had made it outside. He rushed through the door, heart racing, praying she was safe. As he emerged into the cold night air, he looked around, scanning for any sign of her. The campus was still, the chaos of the facility, now a haunting memory. But then he spotted her in the distance, sitting on the grass, her face buried in her hands. "Dr. Hart," he called, rushing toward her. She looked up, her eyes red and filled with tears. "Ethan, I thought I lost you." "I'm here," he said, kneeling beside her. "I'm sorry. I had to stop it." Dr. Hart nodded, a mixture of relief and sorrow in her eyes. "But what have we unleashed? This isn't over." Ethan's heart sank as he recalled the final words of the creature. "I don't know," he admitted, a cold dread settling over him. "But we need to warn everyone. We can't let this happen again." As they sat together, the whispers began to fade into the distance, but the night sky above remained restless, filled with flickering lights that danced ominously against the darkness. Ethan looked up, fear twisting in his gut. They had survived, but at what cost? The universe held secrets they were never meant to uncover, and now they had to face the consequences. Ethan sat beside Dr. Hart on the grass, the chill of the night air settling around them like a heavy blanket. The events of the past few hours replayed in his mind, a relentless cycle of terror and despair. What had they unleashed? "Ethan, we need to get back to the main base," Dr. Hart said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to alert someone about what happened." Ethan nodded, his heart racing as he pushed himself to his feet. "You're right, we can't let this stay hidden." They made their way back to the SUV, the silence of the campus feeling almost suffocating. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien, each shadow a reminder of the horror they had faced. As they reached the vehicle, Ethan felt a deep sense of unease wash over him. "Get in," he urged, scanning the area for any signs of movement. He wanted to be far away from the observatory and the lurking darkness. Once inside, Ethan fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He could feel Dr. Hart's gaze upon him, filled with concern and fear. "Do you think it's gone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he replied, forcing the engine to start. The vehicle roared to life, and he felt a brief surge of hope. "But we can't stick around to find out." As they drove away from the facility, the eerie lights in the sky flickered above them, a reminder of the entity they had encountered. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. "Ethan," Dr. Hart said, breaking the tense silence, "what do we do when we get to the base?" "We gather evidence," he said, determination filling his voice. "We need to convince them that something is out there. We need to warn everyone." The drive felt endless, the road winding through the darkened woods, each twist and turn amplifying their anxiety. Dr. Hart remained quiet, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The weight of their experience hung heavy in the air, and Ethan knew they were far from safe. As they approached the main base, the lights illuminated the building, casting long shadows across the ground. The familiar sight brought Ethan a moment of comfort, but as they parked and stepped out, that comfort quickly dissipated. "Ethan!" a voice shouted from the entrance. It was Dr. Ramirez, a senior researcher who had been part of the T-21 project. He rushed toward them, his face pale and drawn. "What happened? We've been trying to reach you." Ethan felt his heart race. "You won't believe what we found," he said, trying to catch his breath. "There's something out there, something dangerous." Dr. Ramirez's eyes widened, and he glanced at Dr. Hart. "We need to get inside. You're not safe out here." They hurried into the base, and as the door closed behind them, Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him. But that relief was short-lived. The sterile environment of the lab felt oppressive, and the air buzzed with an unsettling energy. "What do you mean, something dangerous?" Dr. Ramirez asked, ushering them into a conference room. "Start from the beginning." As they settled around the table, Ethan recounted their harrowing experience in the abandoned research facility, detailing the whispers, the creature, and the encounter with the strange lights in the sky. Dr. Hart chimed in, adding her observations and the terror they felt during their escape. When he finished, Dr. Ramirez sat in stunned silence, his eyes darting across the table as if searching for answers. "This is unprecedented," he finally said, his voice shaking slightly. "We've always suspected there was more to T-21, but I never imagined this." Ethan leaned forward, desperation flooding his voice. "We have to warn the higher-ups. They need to know what we found. If there's a threat out there, we can't let it go unchecked." Dr. Ramirez nodded slowly, but Ethan could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I agree, but there's a protocol we need to follow, and it won't be easy. They'll want proof." "Proof?" Ethan echoed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "We nearly died. Isn't that enough?" Dr. Ramirez sighed, rubbing his temples. "I understand your urgency, but we have to gather data, document everything. We need more than just words to convince them." Dr. Hart interjected, her voice firm. "We have evidence, the readings from the machine, the data we collected. We can analyze it and show them." "Let's start with the recordings," Dr. Ramirez suggested, gesturing towards the lab equipment. "We can analyze any signals or patterns." Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of determination. They moved to a workstation, pulling up the recordings they had made during their encounter with the creature. The hum of machinery filled the air, and as they loaded the data, a wave of anticipation washed over them. But as they began to analyze the recordings, an unsettling sensation crept back into Ethan's mind. The whispers echoed faintly in the background, an ominous reminder of their recent encounter. "You have not seen the last of us." The creature's voice echoed in his memory, sending a chill down his spine. Dr. Hart leaned closer to the monitor, her brow furrowing. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. "These readings are unusual. They seem to match the patterns we recorded on T21, but there's something else here, something different. Ethan squinted at the screen, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of the data. What do you mean? It's like there are multiple signals layered on top of each other, she explained, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. Almost like a communication pattern. But it's not in any language we know. Dr. Ramirez leaned closer, his expression serious. If they are trying to communicate, what are they saying? You are not welcome. The whispers resonated in Ethan's mind again, and he shook his head to clear it. Maybe they are warning us, Dr. Hart suggested. What if they know something we don't? Suddenly, the lights in the lab flickered, and a low rumble echoed through the building. The three of them exchanged worried glances as the ground trembled beneath their feet. What's happening? Dr. Hart asked, panic rising in her voice. I don't know, Ethan shouted, trying to keep his composure, but we need to find out. Just then, the computer screen flashed with a new set of readings, an urgent series of signals that made Ethan's heart race. Look, he yelled, pointing to the monitor. It's coming from outside. Dr. Ramirez furrowed his brow. What does it say? Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he read the patterns. The signals revealing a series of coordinates. It's a location, he said, confusion and dread washing over him. But it's out in the middle of nowhere. Where exactly? Dr. Hart pressed, her voice steady, despite the chaos unfolding around them. Ethan checked the coordinates and felt his stomach drop. It's near the old launch site, where they conducted secret tests years ago. Dr. Ramirez's expression hardened. We need to investigate. If there's an anomaly there, it could be linked to T21. Are you kidding? Dr. Hart exclaimed, her eyes wide. After what we just went through, we can't go back out there. Whether we like it or not, we need to know what we're dealing with, Dr. Ramirez replied, his tone firm. If we don't, we could be putting everyone at risk. Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through him. Then we need to prepare. Grab whatever equipment we can take. As they gathered their gear, the tremors in the building intensified, sending objects tumbling from shelves. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They are coming! The whispers echoed through the lab, growing louder and more insistent. Ethan, we need to hurry, Dr. Hart urged, her voice shaking as she stuffed supplies into a backpack. Right, he replied, stuffing flashlights and recording equipment into his own pack. Let's go. They hurried out of the lab, the atmosphere thick with tension. The corridors felt alive with energy, the darkness pressing in around them. As they reached the main entrance, they were met with a sight that sent chills down their spines. Outside, the night sky was ablaze with flickering lights, swirling in patterns that seemed to pulse and throb. The air crackled with energy, and an unsettling hum filled their ears. What is that? Dr. Hart whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, Ethan replied, stepping forward, but we have to get to the vehicle. They rushed to the parking lot, the ground trembling beneath their feet. As they reached the SUV, Ethan turned back, feeling a sense of foreboding wash over him. The lights above continued to dance, creating a mesmerizing, yet terrifying spectacle. Dr. Ramirez hurried to the driver's seat, and Dr. Hart climbed in beside him. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. We need to focus. We have a mission. As Dr. Ramirez started the engine, the sound of the vehicle cut through the chaos. I'm not sure what we're going to find out there, but we have to be prepared for anything, he said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Just drive fast, Ethan urged, his heart racing as they pulled away from the base, heading towards the unknown. The SUV roared through the darkened landscape, the headlights illuminating the winding road that led towards the old launch site. Ethan glanced back at Dr. Hart and Dr. Ramirez, who were both tense, their expressions a mix of fear and determination. "This is where it all started," Dr. Ramirez said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "The tests they conducted here were shrouded in secrecy. If there's any link to T-21, it's likely hidden in the data." Ethan nodded, trying to focus on the task ahead. "We need to keep our guard up. Whatever we encountered at the observatory could still be lingering." The further they drove, the more the familiar landscape transformed into a twisted reflection of what it once was. The trees loomed ominously on either side of the road, their gnarled branches resembling skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The night felt heavy with anticipation, as if the very air held its breath, waiting for something to unfold. As they approached the launch site, the ground became uneven and the road narrowed. They passed crumbling structures and rusting machinery, remnants of a bygone era. The atmosphere thickened with a palpable unease. "There it is," Dr. Ramirez said, his voice tinged with awe as they reached the site. The launch pad loomed ahead, a ghostly silhouette against the starry sky. It was a massive concrete platform surrounded by decaying buildings, the remnants of a facility that had long been abandoned. Dr. Hart let out a shaky breath. "It looks desolate. Are you sure we should be here?" Ethan glanced around, feeling the weight of history pressing down on them. "We need to investigate. If the signals are coming from here, it could be important." They parked the SUV and climbed out, the cool night air biting at their skin. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the cracked pavement. Ethan led the way, his heart pounding as they approached the launch control building. The structure was dark, its windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. As they stepped inside, the musty smell of decay filled their nostrils. Ethan switched on his flashlight, illuminating the dusty interior. "Stay close," he instructed, scanning the room. Old monitors and control panels lay in disarray, remnants of a time when this place was alive with activity. "What exactly are we looking for?" Dr. Hart asked, her voice echoing in the emptiness. "Anything that can give us a clue," Ethan replied, moving deeper into the building. "Old logs, data files, anything that connects to T-21. As they rummaged through the debris, a sense of dread settled over Ethan. The air felt charged, as if something was watching them from the shadows. He could feel the whispers growing louder in his mind, a chorus of voices urging him to leave. "Ethan," Dr. Ramirez called from a nearby room. "You need to see this." Ethan hurried over, heart racing as he stepped into the dimly lit space. Dr. Ramirez stood in front of an old terminal, its screen flickering to life. "I found some old data files. They're encrypted, but it looks like they were monitoring something out in space." "What do you mean?" Dr. Hart asked, leaning closer to the screen. "Look at this," Dr. Ramirez said, typing quickly. The screen displayed a series of graphs and readings, pulsating with information. They were tracking unusual signals, energy readings that correspond to the area near the observatory. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Could it be the creature we encountered? "Maybe," Dr. Ramirez replied, frowning as he scrolled through the data. "But there's something else here, anomalies, spikes in energy that seem almost intentional." "Intentional?" Dr. Hart echoed, her eyes widening. "You mean like a communication?" "Exactly," Dr. Ramirez confirmed. "And look at these timestamps. They coincide with the experiments they were conducting on T-21. Ethan felt a growing sense of dread. What if they weren't just studying the phenomena? What if they were trying to contact it? Dr. Hart looked between them, her voice trembling. "That's insane. Why would they do that?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, feeling a pit form in his stomach. "But we need to find out more. We can't ignore this." As they delved deeper into the data, the whispers grew louder, swirling in Ethan's mind like a storm. He could feel a presence looming, a dark force that threatened to consume them. Suddenly, the building shook violently, and a low rumble echoed from deep within the earth. The walls creaked and groaned, sending dust falling from the ceiling. "What was that?" Dr. Hart shouted, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. We need to get out of here," Ethan yelled, grabbing their arms and pulling them towards the exit. As they stumbled outside, the ground trembled beneath them, and the lights in the sky flickered with an eerie intensity. The air buzzed with energy, and the whispers surged, wrapping around Ethan like a vice. "You should not have come here." The voice echoed in his mind, chilling him to the core. They dashed back to the SUV, their hearts racing as the tremors intensified. Dr. Ramirez jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind him. "Go! We need to get out of here now." As Dr. Ramirez started the engine, Ethan looked back at the launch site. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and he could see shapes moving in the shadows, just beyond the edge of the light. "Ethan," Dr. Hart cried, her voice panicked. "What's happening?" "I don't know," he shouted, feeling a rush of fear. "Just drive." Dr. Ramirez floored the accelerator, and the SUV sped away from the site, the eerie glow of the lights flickering behind them. As they raced down the road, Ethan glanced back, feeling a sense of foreboding settle in his chest. "We need to warn the others," he said, his voice urgent. "We can't let this be swept under the rug." Dr. Hart nodded, her face pale. "But how do we convince them? They won't believe us without proof." "We'll make them believe," Ethan replied, determination igniting within him. "We'll show them the data, everything we found. We'll get the attention of those who can help." But even as he spoke, he felt a creeping sense of dread. The whispers were still there, echoing in his mind, a reminder that they were not alone. The night felt alive with energy, and the world beyond the SUV blurred as they sped away from the horrors lurking in the darkness.